Well, welcome to Good Business. I'm Nicole Murray, and today we'll take a journey into the contemporary and exciting arena of art. Well, the business world today can prove quite cutthroat, especially when you add in the word art. Some people say that art stuff won't get you a real job. Well, these days they'd be wrong. On today's show, we'll be exploring the business world of the artist and how they can have a viable business that will support them financially while still expressing their passion within their artistic genre. First up, we'll be talking to Leanne Vincent about the Switch Contemporary Art Space and how they support the emerging artist. A little later, we take a look around Ginny Jones' studio space and talk to her about how she has managed to sustain an ongoing creative business for more than 20 years. And finally, we'll hear from Associate Director at the University of Southern Queensland, Dr. Darrell Sparks, on how to make a business from art films. So stay with us for an incredible creative journey in the business of art. Well, approximately 3 years ago, philosopher and author Gilbert Berg and photographer and artist Leanne Vincent established the idea of a contemporary art space after a long-standing exchange of ideas. This later evolved into the reality of the Switch, with Gilbert as the project director and events coordinator, and Leanne as the gallery director and photographer. The Switch Contemporary Art Space is an innovative business that is both a commercial and creative enterprise. Today we have the founder and owner of the gallery with us, Leanne Vincent. Hi Leanne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Nicole.
That's all right. So Leanne, tell us, what is the focus of the Switch?
Well, our main focus is to promote the artists in the local region, which is Ipswich, and just offer them a space where they can have their work shown so they gain exposure. And also we do mentor them in how to brand and market themselves as an art business.
Okay, and how does that work?
The mentoring process. Well, I actually received a grant last year to actually put on 6 solo exhibitions for emerging artists, and that included the mentoring program, where I actually have meetings, consultations with artists on a weekly basis, where we go through things like how to brand themselves, how to create logos, how to create online galleries, and basically how to promote themselves and present their work as well for an exhibition.
Yeah, that's pretty important because artists are so focused on doing their artwork, and then the business side sometimes gets left.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, you've been established for 3 years now. So what sort of planning had to go into creating this business?
Well, we've had the gallery for 2 years, but the first year of the business we did a lot of research in the local area to see how many arts groups there are, different types of artists. We also joined a number of the arts organisations as well as the Chamber of Commerce, so we were looking at business as well, like matching business with artists to further promote their work. So we did a lot of research in that first year, a lot of networking. It was very important to get to know that community.
Yeah, and so from your findings, you decided there was a niche market there for this business?
Yes, there was. Currently we're the only dedicated art gallery independently owned in Ipswich, so we're the only space that does this sort of thing for artists there.
And so are there many artists in the Ipswich area?
Yes, there are many artists working in different styles. We focus mainly on contemporary artists. We also offer our support to the Bremer TAFE, which have a really good arts program, so we get a lot of their students wanting to come into our gallery and have their work exhibited.
So that's your main source of artists coming into the gallery, or do you source them elsewhere?
No. We source them a lot in social media, so through Facebook and blogs, and we have our own Facebook page, so that attracts a lot of artists to like our page, and then we can get in contact with them that way and look at their work.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's gone into the online world. Is that a big component then?
It is. We do probably most of our advertising online as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is.
So you've had to become well versed in social media.
That's right, yeah.
And so how is the Switch funded then?
Basically, we funded it with our own savings initially, but we do charge a hire fee, so artists can hire the space for solo exhibitions or group exhibitions, and we also take a commission from the artworks that we sell. We have other little projects that we do outside of the gallery, which is the Art Talk Philosophy Cafe series, and we run that in 3 cafes in the top of town precinct in Ipswich, and every month we have a new guest speaker and we rotate between 3 of the cafes. So we make some funds from that. And we also do other little projects, you know, in the town. We do pop-up gallery spaces as well.
Yeah.
And I'm also a commercial photographer, so I do a lot of commercial photography business as well.
How does that fit into the art gallery then, your work?
My commercial work. Well, the gallery is a base as well for my photography business, so people can come and consult with me there. So I get a lot of work from businesses around.
Businesses there as well.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and so with the cafe, what sort of, you have guest speakers, you were saying, what sort of topics do they cover? Is that business topics, or is that art topics, or is it both?
It's all related to the arts in some way, so it can be visual arts or music or literature. It could be any type of art, and it can be as simple as what is art. I think that was the first ever art talk cafe we had, was what is art. So we discuss issues. Sometimes we look at artists' work, so artists will come and talk about their work.
Good. And so what sort of exhibitions do you have coming up, or events in that?
Okay, well, up until the end of the year, we've got solo shows, 2 weekly solo shows. So we'll be having art openings twice every month. We've also got the Art Talk Cafe until November. And our final exhibition for the year, which is what we do every year, is a group exhibition called Size Matters, and it's an exhibition of small artworks. So that's in its 3rd year now. So we invite artists from around the region to put their work into that show.
Wow, so there's a lot happening in the Ipswich area for artwork.
There
and
is,
a growing need for it, so that's really
very
great.
exciting.
Yeah. All right, well, Leanne, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, if you'd like to take a look at some of those upcoming events, you can go to the website, theswitchcas.com.au. If you would like to visit the gallery, it is open Wednesday to Friday from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Well, stay with us. After the break, we'll meet up with Ginny Jones and find out what steps she takes to making a living from her artwork. We'll be right back for more of Good Business. Welcome back to Good Business. Today we're talking about the business of art. Ginny Jones has been involved with art since she was a young girl. Ginny, as she prefers to be known, is a ceramicist, but being the owner of a small business also has a number of other roles that she needs to play. After a number of years of successfully producing an income from her art, Ginny is an expert on thinking outside the square when it comes to making an art business viable. I caught up with her after a studio tour by Artisan, Queensland's peak organisation for presenting and promoting unique and individual quality and crafted design. So Ginny, tell us, what exactly does a ceramicist do?
I make work out of clay, and I specialise in porcelain work, and I make tableware and I make sculptures out of clay. And I often make works of clay that's not fired, so that I make ephemeral work, and I go to different places and will construct a work outside, and then I leave it there to decompose, and as it decomposes I take photographs of it. So I'm not entirely a ceramicist. I do a whole range of works, and ceramics is one part of the work that I do as an artist.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us, how does your work differ from a typical regular job, typical day at work?
Well, I come into the studio and I don't have someone to tell me what I'm going to do every day. If I've got a commission, I have to work, but sometimes I just come in and I think of new works that I'm going to make, or I can decide what I'm going to do for that day, which might be go out for a walk and think about a new work that I can make, or I sit down and I throw. When I make this porcelain tableware, and when I'm making something like that, I spend a lot of time throwing, and that's all I'm doing. So my work varies a lot during the day. Yeah.
Ginny, did you plan to create a business from your artwork, or did it just evolve naturally?
I used to teach. I taught art at university for a long time, so that would support my art practice. But I retired from teaching about 8 years ago, so now I need my artwork to provide my income. So I've started a small business.
And so you've got different aspects of your artwork. So you've got your studio work, and you've had studio tours and things like that. People come and, yeah. And then you've got the outside work, the installations.
Yeah,
and,
commissioned work I do, yeah. So some public art I take on. If I don't have a lot of different aspects to my practice, it's never going to be viable. So I have to diversify quite a lot, which is quite good because it makes it a lot more interesting than just doing the one thing all the time.
Yeah, to make it viable as a business.
Yeah.
Okay, and so how do you challenges you have with, say, the overseas foreign imports, the cheaper imports? Does that affect your business at all? Or?
It used to, but just in the last few years there's been a focus on using local products and being sustainable and all those sorts of things. So a lot more people now are interested in buying artworks that are made locally and have some aspect of sustainability and things like that about them, So
it's almost come full circle from we used to have the original and then we have the copies and then back to the original. So people are still prepared to pay a premium for good quality handcrafted work then?
Well, they are, but you have to establish that reputation first. So, and I think you have to really educate the public too. Like when I work overseas, particularly in Japan, they're so conscious of ceramic art that anyone can tell you where a piece comes from or who made it and all those sorts of things, because they grow up knowing about the tableware that they use. And so educating people about the value of handmade ceramics is really important.
So that Japanese, and you worked in Korea as well, that those audiences that have a different take on art than Australia, so it's a different market for you?
Yeah, there's just a lot more emphasis on the value of art products, and but it's changing in Australia, and as I was saying, with all the handmade thing going on now, that it's people are becoming more aware of it, and where things are made and who's made them, and makes the work a lot more personal and to use, and
And so from a marketing perspective, how do you market the business? Is it through networking or word of mouth? How does that work?
Both. I mean, online, some are online presence, but you also have to get out there and meet people and tell people what you're doing and get people interested in how you're working and what you're producing, and really helps if you can explain all those things to a person who's looking at your work, you know, the added value of a handmade work as opposed to a factory-made piece. Some people can't recognise it at first, but if you start to point it out, they can they understand really easily what makes it different.
So like when you did the studio tour and you explained the process behind it, so they become more emotionally connected to the piece. That's interesting, isn't it? And so for young up-and-coming artists who want to take that and create a business from their artwork, is there associations that they need to join? Or?
Well, in the art schools now, they have run courses, like part of their curriculum is business, how to promote your work and how to sell it and all that sort of thing. So a lot more aware than when I went through art school. You didn't even mention business, how to get into a gallery and all that whole range of things that you need to know.
And so what sort of plans do you have then for the future for your work?
For my work? Well, I really like I've worked a lot overseas with the ephemeral works and some more fine art sort of work. So I've worked a lot overseas doing works like that, but just over the last few years I've really made a focus on trying to work a lot more in Brisbane. And the projects that I do, the ephemeral projects, were quite well accepted in Korea and Japan, as they've been focusing on that sort of work for quite a long time, whereas when I came back to Brisbane it was like it wasn't really going. I mean, it's starting to now, but people didn't know about works like that, so now I'm trying to focus on getting my work known around Brisbane and Queensland. Yeah.
So Ginny, art in Queensland doesn't seem to hold as much importance to the political bodies as, say, it does in New South Wales or Victoria. So how does that affect your business?
It will. It does affect my business, and it will now that the funding is going to be cut even more for support for artists. And any changes in funding always affect my business because artists are quite often reliant on funding for at least part of a project they're doing or for running a studio, so it is really going to affect my business quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, Ginny, thanks so much for showing us around your studio and joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Good, thanks for coming.
Well, stay with us. After the break, we'll find out about a different genre of art and what it takes to make, promote and succeed in the area of art films. We'll be right back to talk with Dr. Darrell Sparks. Dr. Darrell Sparks has been in the film industry for over 20 years. He has research interests that include documentary making, script writing and drama. With interests that include medieval and Australian convict archaeology, we're sure to have some interesting films on the way. Well, Darrell's professional affiliations include the Screen Producers Association of Australia and the Media, Arts and Entertainment Alliance. Thanks for coming in today, Darrell.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nicole. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. So Darrell, we've got art films and we have Arthouse Films. Can you just explain the difference between the two, please?
Sure. A lot of people get confused between the term arthouse and art. And art films tend to be more along the lines of people who are artists who want to make films. And that's people like Andy Warhol, for example, who would, him and his friends would just grab cameras and they would make films with images that actually had no story, they had no real actors and things like that. And then art house filmmakers are people who sort of delve in the low budget area of genre, of non-genre films. So think of, you know, a film that isn't made at a Hollywood studio, and that tends to be what we classify as an art house film.
Okay. And so for art house films as a business, how do they go about making money?
It's very, very difficult nowadays. I mean, it's difficult enough for the Hollywood studios to be making money out of film, let alone what art house people and art filmmakers can do. When you talk about art film, I think there's really no way to make money out of art films, and that's because what art films are really about is they're an extension of like doing a painting or a sculpture, where the film itself is just symbols and images that convey messages. And a lot of great filmmakers have started out that way. You think of like Francis Ford Coppola, who made The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. He was an art filmmaker. Robert Downey Jr., as we all know, his father, who happens to be Robert Downey Sr.
Funny that.
Yes, strange that. He was a big art filmmaker in the 60s that came out of the, I guess, the counterculture at that time. And then we also have people like David Lynch, who's a really well-known art film director, and his first film was of course Eraserhead, which was a very famous film. But again, these films had no stories, they really had no characters, they were symbols, and it's like looking at a painting or looking at a sculpture, and you get an emotional attachment, you get a visual response from what you see, and that's what they intended with art films. And art films also were very strongly aligned either politically or socially to a cause or an agenda. On the other side of the coin, art house films, which incidentally is predominantly what we make in Australia, because we don't have the budgets to compete with the big Hollywood films. So people typify art house movies as sort of being low budget non-genre films. And by non-genre I mean not low budget zombie movies or Dracula movies or things like that. They're sort of low budget dramas. And you know, you can think of films that we've made here before, like Picnic at Hanging Rock, Lantana, The Cars That Ate Paris by Peter Weir, Bruce Beresford's early films. They tend to be art house because they don't get a wide distribution. They don't get a huge audience, although they are often very popular. But don't get shown all over the world like, say, a Batman does or a Thor does or something like that. So because in Australia we can't afford to make the $120 million films here, we tend to look at making art house movies. And that they range anywhere between, say, $1 to $10 million, which, $10 million is a pretty good budget to have. And they tend to focus on very strong character-driven stories and very heavily scripted stories. So when they get played, they won't get released in 500 cinemas. They'll get released in 2 or 3 cinemas in Brisbane or 2 or 3 in Sydney, things like that. And even though they're good films, they don't really end up having a wide audience. Now, how to make money out of that? Well, there's lots of different avenues. All of the screen funding agencies like Screen Australia and Screen Queensland, Screen Victoria, they actually support people to make art house movies. There's also what we have now called the Producer's Offset, which the tax department actually gives you 40% of your budget to make.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helped things a lot, and we're making a lot more films now.
Because of that.
Because of that, yeah. 5 years ago, before we had the offset, Australia was lucky to make 2 or 3 films a year. Now we're making like 15 to 20, and mostly because of that. And there's also, people are getting private investors or crowdsourcing involved.
Yeah, I've seen that.
If you go to possible.com, you'll see a lot of Australians have put their films on that site to get crowdsourced funding. And a lot of people don't need a lot of money to make these sort of films, but they might need $10,000 or $20,000. So there are avenues to make these things, and of course, once the film's released and a distributor picks it up, you also get money returned from people going to the movies to see your film.
Yeah, so I've noticed people do a lot of online promotion as well with the films, and sites like Indiegogo and things like that, where they raise funds that way and try and get the viewing public to be part of the production by donating money and getting memorabilia from the film and things like that. Have you seen that a lot?
I have, and it tends to be happening more and more. And unfortunately, I guess the sad part of that is that people are having to rely on non-traditional forms of money because the what we call the easy money, which is the government money, is drying up.
It's drying up.
And there's a lot of films trying to get a smaller and smaller pool of money every year from the government sources. So it's becoming a lot more difficult. So people are turning to these, but the problem is though, you're not going to raise $3 million through Possible. You've really, the government really has to subsidise filmmaking in this country, and has since we started in the 1920s. We don't have big studios like they have in Hollywood, so it's virtually impossible for the Australian film industry to stand on its own 2 feet.
So it's really hard for it to be commercially viable then?
Absolutely. But a lot of people say, oh well, then we shouldn't have a film industry if it can't survive on its own. But there's lots of industries. Holden and Ford get government handouts every year, to stay in business. So if we lose our filmmaking community and our ability to make films, then we lose our ability to tell our stories and being able to put those stories out into the wider marketplace. And the interesting thing is, more people outside of Australia see Australian films than people who go to see the cinema here to see Australian films. Yeah. It's just weird. We're hugely popular in France and Germany and even England. More people see Australian films in England than they do in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Gosh.
I know. But that's good because we get a return on that as well. So, when our films go out to the world, that money that's made out there comes back to Australia. Yeah. So that's a really good thing.
So what do you see as a future for that, just very quickly?
I think more and more people will rely on crowdsourcing, but the good thing is technology is getting cheaper, so it's actually getting cheaper to make films because of the technology involved. So I really think that, and especially with the offset now, we're doing really well, and we're going to be making more and more films in the future.
Let's hope so.
Yes, fingers crossed.
All right, well thanks so much, Darrell, for coming in and sharing that with us.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Much appreciated.
Well, what a fabulous show it's been. So if you're an emerging artist, we hope you've picked up some tips and tricks to earn yourself a living from what you love doing. If you would like any more information, you can contact us at goodbusiness.tv.com.au. Well, it's been a pleasure to be your host, and I'll see you next week for more of Good Business.